Okay, well, welcome everyone. Today's presentation is part of the Culture Builds Communities webinar series. This community-based project is designed to help Native communities plan and develop cultural facilities. Culture Builds Communities is a project of the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. Major funding is provided by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the National Museum of the American Indian, and Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies. We'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you. I couldn't get to my mute button. I thought that was on purpose. Welcome, everybody. This is a great pleasure to be here. It has been an honor to understand and get to know Susan Feller and her group. I by chance met her on a construction site that was sharing the conference, the ATOM conference, and had the honor of giving some tours of a project we were doing up in Minnesota. It's absolutely eye-opening to me, and to know that she's in my home state of Oklahoma just makes it even more special. With me today is Sam and Sean. You've met them. I'm hoping this can be an interactive process. And what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through a series, the first of a 6-part series on Culture Builds Communities. First one being design process, second being selecting and working with an architect and contractors, 3, programming, 4, site selection, 5, developing the design, indigenous architecture, and 6, developing the design and the contemporary museum. In this is something that we put our heads together and felt like coming from architects to you, it's trying to develop a story or build a roadmap of this process of going through a design process. And these words will mean different things to different people. And I'm going to give you what it means to me and try to relate back to some of the items and some of the key components that you're familiar with, and hopefully get to share with you the joy of creating a 3D environment, the joy of working with people collaboratively, and taking things from ground zero all the way to completion, and the pitfalls, but also some of the stories along the way. I encourage you to add in. We'll have a Q&A at the end, but if you have any questions, if I'm speaking too fast, please let me know, or not fast enough. I am, sometimes we'll drag on, but, and I would like to encourage Sean and Sam to chime in too as resident experts, and to keep this thing active and integrated. We were going to do introductions at this point. Sean, would you like to say anything else?
No, I'm good.
Okay, Sam, same way? I'll go right into it. So with this, I am a strong believer in the design process and how we can organize ourselves. We're talking about a journey that feels like it should be understandable, but what we're creating are items that you can't get off the shelf. They're unique pieces and parts for any type of project we're doing. And the influencers are always the people, place, and culture, the times, anything that's going on can influence what you're doing, but mostly your unique community. It's a unique place we're building in, and it's a unique set of issues that we're building too. So on that, we've tried to come through and develop this this program to kind of let you know what we see. But my passion does lie in creating built environments and to speak to the people, place, and culture that the projects serve. So that's a start. The design process is this webinar, this title, and there's supporting documents that you can find. on the list there that will be made available to you. First thing is what is a design process, and why is it important? Why can't we just have it be a simple thing that just comes to us intuitively? It's important because it matters to plan, to organize, to understand, and at the end of the day, to get what truly represents you and your community is critical, from form, function, process, all of that. So in that, it is key and important. And I've got a guide on the next slide that I think is an important piece, and it's a planning map. And what we're going to develop today is a roadmap that's going to take us through at least this phase of the design process and show you an idea of what that might be. And in this roadmap, we're going to talk about the must-see highlights that you see on your brochure, what you see along the way on this path, what we need to be aware of, what we need to put on the agenda, that we need to have markers along this path that we're looking for in the design process. The other thing is travel tips. What's the climate like? What's the culture like? What are we doing? What do we need to prepare for? What type of shoes do we need to wear? What type of clothing do we need to have with us? But we want to be ready to make the most out of this trip. The last is a transport planner, is what do we need to bring with us? What do we need to have to make this truly be a trip, a journey that gives us what we need at the end? How do we need to plan for that? And at the end of the day, if we do it all right, according to the brochure, we should have something that easily folds and stands the test of time and is weatherproof. But this is just kind of a fun way to look at what are we trying to do. We're developing a road through the system. We're developing a trip that gets us from point A to point B in what can be a very complicated process. So how do other people look at the design process? A lot of people categorize it in a process-oriented kind of piece, to where, and it comes off mostly as circular diagrams when they put a graphic to it. We define a problem, we collect information, we brainstorm and analyze ideas. And thank you, Melissa, for letting me have a little bit of time, because before I edited this was a Brian storm and it didn't make sense. So I'm glad I got to correct that misspelling. We develop solutions, we get feedback, and we improve the design, but we don't stop there. A lot of the design process is not linear, it's not a straight line, it's circular. I had an architect tell me early on that the design process is similar to a 10-speed bicycle wheel. That shows you my dating myself. But it's like a bicycle wheel, to where you're moving forward, but the wheel is effectively going forwards and backwards and cycling through the same area to make movement forward. And a lot of times the design process is that way. That's how you refine it. That's how you grow it. That's how you get the things that you want in. It starts off with a wish list. It ends with a worked out kind of flow that works itself out. But it is a circular kind of component. It does graph very much that way. Another idea is this is a linear bar that is a design process that talks about strategic definition, preparation and brief, concept design, which is really part of where we usually think of where an architect steps in, developed design, technical design, construction, handover, closeout, and in use. So this is almost a cradle to cradle kind of idea of the life of a project, not just when it's being built, but from the very start of the thought process and planning to the end of how you get in and turn the lights on and move through the space. And this was done by the Royal Institute of British Architects. But then when they want to tell you how it works, this linear bar becomes a circle again. That's the other graphic they put with it. So it's really amazing how a linear process is still a cycle, and it's to be worked through, and it's not to be done, but it's to be improved upon. Even though it sounds like from strategic definition to in-use occupancy would be a done deal, it's not. You're going to be living in these facilities. These facilities will be different from day one to when in 10 years. We need to plan for the future. We need to understand that. So with this, with all these things and it becoming more linear, I've also seen this design process defined and shown in this very articulate, very organized way, and it's this. And unfortunately, this is what it feels like sometimes. It does have these moments of chaos, and it does have this moment of not feeling like you're making movement in one single direction. And it feels like sometimes it should be more organized. But I tell you, from my experience in almost 35 years of doing this, is sometimes the chaos and the willingness to be open to the process creates the best results. In that, we have to trust that the line has a purpose and the line's actually being controlled. And I'm letting it be controlled by one of my favorite characters from childhood is Harold in the Purple Crayon, that his crayon and his line created space, it created definition, it created the built environment. And if we have trust in the process and in the process that will get us there, then that's part of the biggest part of being a team and collaborating on this, what can be intimidating and daunting, the design process. So what are we going to talk about today? The design process as a chapter or as a book will be divided into 3 chapters. Planning, but planning's not good enough. We want to plan, we want to plan again, and we want to plan even more. So that's the first thing. Turning a wish list into a plan and establishing a concept. You know, a wish and a dream and a hope is great, and it's a start, but it's going to take rolling up your sleeves and getting into it. And then building design, concept to reality. And that's almost more of the building component. You'll see that as you go through. So in that, with each chapter, we're going to kind of break that down into smaller sections. And within planning, we're going to have strategic planning. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about land use planning. We're going to talk about master planning. And the images to the right is trying to, I'm an architect, and I love the line going back to Harold. I believe in the value of the pen. And so I'm going to relate a lot of my ideas to graphic images. This is a master plan that I was working on up in Minnesota for a while. And I'll reference a couple of projects as almost testimonials that I've done, because that's the best way that I can probably illustrate the ideas of this process, this road trip that we're on. The next one is turning a wish into a plan, establishing the concept, balancing ambition with reality, a partie, the organizing principle, and the visitor's experience. Sometimes we have to get out of ourselves and look back at what other people think, especially if we've been in it for a while and we want a fresh idea or opinion. Another way to look at, and the images that are up, are another project I worked on that these were some of the images that they weren't words on a page, they were feelings, they were emotions, they were, we want a library, we want a space to gather, we want a place to eat, cook, and have meals. We want a place to practice our crafts. We want a place to show our artifacts and be a part of them in that way. And we also want a place that we can hear the language. That all is key and effective in going into a program and going into the built environment. The next one that we'll talk about at a little more length than here is the building design concept to reality. And this to me is more in the wheelhouse of an architect. And it talks about the early stages of programming. It talks about getting into the site, the land, the important features. It talks about schematic design, design development, construction documents, and it even gets into the built environment of what a building looks like when it starts coming to life. It starts growing out of the earth. It starts showing the materials that are on it that are key and valuable. Now, some of these discussions I have today, I'm touching on today, but Sam and Sean are going to bring some of these to life. They're going to breathe into them. We're going to shine more light onto them. And there's going to be more discussions that I hope take what we've started today, and I know they will, because those two gentlemen are fantastic, and they'll shed more and better light on it than I can. But you'll hear the voices of 3 people that are telling stories of what is near and dear to what we do and how pleased we are to be able to have this as our vocation. Starting off with the first chapter, planning, strategic planning. I'm going to kind of break this up, and we can pause at the end of these chapters or in between or wherever you want to, and dive back in as much as we need to. But I want to make sure I'm cautious of time, so we have Q&A at the end. Strategic planning, what is it? You guys have heard the words already. I'm sure that Art Wolf actually has presented. And strategic planning is critical to an organization and a project as one of the first steps. As we saw in the Royal Institute of British Architects, it was part of their timeline. And many of the American versions don't go that far. They only have 5 steps, but it really is a key part. It agrees, strategic planning is a way in which an organization agrees on the vision of where it wants to go and what it wants to achieve. So agreed upon vision. It ensures the vision meets the needs of the audiences and the community. It meets needs. It ensures that it identifies the resources needed to fulfill the vision. It identifies the resources, and it allows sound decision-making in the response to changes in the environment. Sound decision-making, all those are key, and all those are practical, and they're critically important. Why do we do strategic planning? Focus and reaffirm your mission. Define the vision of the future. Review and affirm, or not, your existing and proposed programs. Educate and involve your board, staff, volunteers, and community, and define and prioritize goals, strategic objectives, and action plans. These are so essential and critical, and I don't have the knowledge and the pedigree to pay them justice. I appreciate Art, and I appreciate Sean and Sam. I'm a guy that likes to draw, but before I draw, there needs to be all kinds of plans in place, and this is a critical effort to the plan. Another critical effort is when we get into the master planning or the land use plan, is trying to understand physically what you have on your community, on your lands. Understand your land, and if you can, diagram it in terms that are meaningful to your community: institutional, commercial, residential, natural, agricultural, places you like to go sit under a tree, whatever is critical to you, because if it's critical, it will become part of your effort to keep it or to reinforce it or to understand what you like about it so you can emulate that. Consider the natural elements and keep it simple so that people can identify with it and they can understand it and they can grow with it. So that's a land use plan, and this is an existing land use. Then the next phase is to look at your land, and this is another project I worked on, and what we try to do is understand the key elements of a plan. And once a community says, here's where we want to go, we want to diversify, we want to grow our residential, we want to have places where one group, residential, doesn't conflict with commercial, or doesn't conflict with gaming, or doesn't conflict with our cultural, or we want to embed culture. Then we start analyzing the key thoroughfares, key influencers, all of that. And then as you can see on the left, then we can lay over on top of it the different land use plans that we can do, and hopefully have an idea of how the community wants to grow. In this community, the land that was currently being used are the colored lands, the yellows, the greens, the reds and oranges, the blues. The gray is currently agricultural, that they're trying to understand what they're going to do for their next 7 generations. What we developed with them is ideas of how their community could grow so they could be more vital and vibrant in the future and have more safeguards against things that might happen. In this, the scheme on the left, the map on the left, we put pros and cons to each. It talks about creating enterprise zones for commercial down the main corridors. It talked about pushing or allowing residential to grow into the more quiet areas so that they don't have through traffic. They talked about letting gaming have and entertainment having a front door to the boulevards and the corridors. It started mapping out what their community might look like at a macro scale that we could come in later and even reinforce this almost this idea at a micro scale. One of the influencers became, where does our community center go in our community? And we just put 5 dots on the map of their fee and trust map and looked at what each one of them meant. And some of them identified with their natural resources, some of them didn't. The number 1, the dot in the middle, was close to the highway, but it was inside the residential, and it was near the center of the heart of the community. Number 2 was actually up on a great hill that had a fantastic view that was part of their community that they could oversee their lands. Number 3 was more of a front door kind of approach if they wanted to be open and present to visitors that would come by. Number 5 was absolutely in the crossroads. So it was kind of a front door, but it was also easily accessed for future growth and current community lands. And number 4 was just a real sweet piece of land that the deer still are on, and there's a real attachment to that piece that they thought might be a great place. So we did that, and I'll try to go through these. This is not what this is necessarily about, but understanding how another community has worked and worked with it, I think is key. They organized their priorities. They studied the various synergies of where you would put items and what they would mean, where the elders might go, how close it is to gaming or how far away it was from commercial, whether it was in the center of their community or on the edge. They planned for 7 generations, and they've been thinking about this community center for 20 years and have been doing some great work. They allowed for growth, and they considered the natural elements. They didn't want to pave paradise and put on a parking lot. They wanted to integrate with the natural streams and the forests, the hardwood forests. They wanted to integrate with the high spots and dwell in some of the low spots of the land. What the land gave them, they wanted to use. So in that, this was one of the dots that was on the map. This was kind of a front door dot. And this was right next to a highway. And in this master planning scheme, it dealt with the 4 different areas of community government, education, culture, and residential. And it all kind of developed their own little piece, and it has a cultural aspect to it. And they were looking at possibly even putting the elders on the other side, close to the heart of the community, so that the elders can have a place and they wouldn't be away from the community. So there's so many pieces and parts that you can dovetail in as you start mixing in the retail commercial, you start laying over the residential and cultural and government, and then you start weaving it together with trails, parks, open space that work with nature. Master planning is not necessarily a Jeffersonian grid that you pave everything and put mile markers up. It really can blend in with the community. In this community, straight lines were not really appreciated in that point. And we kind of took it to the limit, even with all the front doors having a east and west exposure and not a true north in this cold weather climate. This is chapter 2, the design process, turning a wish into a plan. I'd like to pause for a moment and see if there's any questions, or if we should just go ahead. I'll go ahead as I want to respect everybody's time. Turning a wish into a plan, balance ambition with reality. Part T, the organizing principle and the visitor's experience. Balancing ambition and reality. It's great for a community to have a checklist, and that checklist is important. And we're going back to, again, these images of what do you really want, what do you desire, and how can we deliver that? What's the need, and what's the essence of the need? So in this particular piece, we had a list of desires that they want that were written down and very articulate. And what happened with that is it developed a program um, that was very simple and very simplified. And there's ways to deal with the program, but it started relating directly to the images you see on the right, but also the process that we knew at the time of how a facility might be used, down to a coat check became a critically important item if there's only 12 on the list. But the other thing that we did was we took that list and we divided it into 7 working principles of what that is, so that we could start grouping things together and not have so many frayed knots, so many lines out in the water, but we could deal with a few that captured everything. And a program can do that. They wanted to tell their story. They wanted to gather as a community. They wanted to speak their language. They wanted to hear our elders. They wanted to dance, drum, and sing, and they wanted to practice their crafts. And they wanted a final resting place for their sacred artifacts. Those were their words. And those were things that we understood by being able to listen as they spoke. And it became essential. And these types of ideas, these early planning phases, before shovels hit the ground, before any material showed up on the site, this is what formed their cultural center more than anything else. So partie, what's a partie? Partie is an interesting thing. It's a French word, and we architects, and this is the way I interpret this, is it's an organizing principle, and it gives order to disorder. It allows more participation. If you walk into a room and it's disorderly, you either feel like you have to scream or you feel like you have to sit down and get your back to the wall. But when things order and they become understandable, they become approachable, and it allows more participation. So an organizing principle in anything you do lets somebody know what the next step might be without you telling them a list of items. It creates a better and deeper understanding of what we're trying to do. The project on the right was a bridge project that had the flowing nature in the roof. But one of the organizing elements was a concept that I was told about being in 2 different worlds. And so the bison's hoof, the split hoof, became those 2 worlds that represented itself on top of the gathering space. So under the roof of the gathering space that had the split hoof, the community came together as one. And that was kind of an organizing principle. But it wasn't maybe the full partie, but it was something that you could build on and everybody could add in and make it a stronger and stronger concept and feel a part of this design process. The visitor experience is critical because it takes us out of who we are and it puts us into our guests and their mindset of what they might do. And you have to ask, what's their takeaway? What did they get? Was it educational to it? Was it inspirational? Did they participate or engage, or did they feel like a wallflower? What did they leave with? Was it something that was memorable? Was it an item? Was it a memory? And will it come back? And I guess to add another is, how will they engage with this experience in the future? So in that, sometimes our guests, we prepare more for, but sometimes we need to understand that our guests help us be the better part of ourselves when we look at what we would do to the visitor, for the visitor, as opposed to what we might do for our own place. Okay, chapter 3 in this short little book is the design process. And this process is starting to get to more of the architectural component of programming, schematic design, design development, construction documents. It's that part of the wheel that is where I feel like I've spent most of my 35 years. Design development, construction documents, bidding and negotiation, construction administration, closeout and warranties, and post-occupancy evaluation. It's kind of the start and finish of the building process, but as we've discussed, there are critical phases before on the planning and understanding and desires to have a place. And then there's critical pieces at the end because we're building something that lives on well after the trailers leave and the dust settles. In fact, most of the projects I've worked on are better in 10 years than when I left the project, because people change them. They make them their own. So in that, I found another diagram, and this diagram feels like a linear bar, and it has kind of impact zones along this trip. So this is a roadmap, and I'm more with Harold in the purple crayon, that I can't draw a line this straight, and I've never seen a line this straight in the process. But it does deal with conceptual design, schematic design, design development, construction documents, construction bidding, construction administration. Like I said before, you know, the process really is longer than this, but you know, in that, along this bar, we have things to see on this trip. So on that bar, we do have programming, budget, we have floor plans, we've got different things that turn on and off, and those are the things we need to look for along this trip that help the process go along. As an architect, there's things I want from you, there's things you want from me. We need to get the city planning to join in. So those are all part of it. Programming, what is it? It's usually you know, lists, but what we try to do is we still try to make them a little more graphic, so we can look at the funny little dots on the right are bubble diagrams that take it away from architecture and deal with just the essence of what the space is, the entry. How does the entry relate to the offices? How does it relate to the community room? How does it relate to the gift shop? Who needs to be next to who? Where does it need to be? What's the scope of it in size and scale? And then how does it flow? Sometimes elements will repel themselves and they don't want to be connected. Other times, too many things want to be connected to one thing, and you need to understand that from the early stages. And that's what develops your program, and that's what develops. And we'll usually do a bubble diagram that works with the facility in general, with each department, but the programming creates the building blocks for the project. This is what we start pulling out of the paper and building walls with. Adjacencies are discovered between program spaces. Who likes to be next to who and who doesn't? Where's the coffee pot go? And how do I get there? That's what I deal with every day. Creates the square footages and the various program elements. And sometimes we can test them against industry standards. But once again, like we said, you guys, this is a unique project. You might have something that's bigger than what other guys have, and they might not have anything that you've got. These aren't packaged units that we get at Lowe's or Home Depot. These are special projects. Creates a roadmap for developing the project layout. It does. Some of the spaces need light, some of them don't. Some of them don't want light. Some of them need adjacencies. And then organizes the program elements. It tells us where to put them, where they naturally want to lie. Schematic design is kind of, once we go through conceptual, and I thought I had a conceptual slide, I apologize. The schematic design starts getting into the point where we start looking at the programs we've been doing, and you can start seeing some of the colors and some of the organization. It starts feeling more like a building, and we start putting it on the site. And schematic design, we usually try to go from start to finish with the program to a resemblance of the building to get to this phase. And what we're doing here is site studies, building blocking and massing, so that we can understand how big it is, where it sets, and what the shapes are, kind of in a rudimentary way. And we can get pretty detailed. Program refinement. Sometimes when we start putting the program into a building form, you realize you need different things. You might need another piece or part. Fenestration studies, how the windows look, where we get the light, north side versus south side, protecting in the harsh environments. This environment here is in the Southern California area, San Diego Valley. And so this building started generating large overhangs on the south side. it started having views up on a bluff that kind of overlooked the valley. So fenestration studies kind of help us understand how the building behaves within its climate and what it looks like. You know, the Tom Bodette lights, you know, what turns on at night, what can you see through, the transparencies, the opacities, and both were critical in this project. Interior and exterior concepts, client and stakeholder meetings. You guys are part of this process. At least that's the way I practice. I know Sam and Sean do as well. That this isn't my project. This is your project. And if anything, I tell most of my clients that I'm a graphic scribe. I draw into reality the wishes and desires within these programs that we need to have. And if I draw only what I want, then it's not what you need. It needs to be derived from a series of meetings, conversations, understandings, and honestly, I need to be educated of what's important to you. And then we have, those are the great meetings, and then we've got city plan review meetings and things like that they want us to get in early on, and those are great. I don't think they're as fun. So in this, what I'm showing up here is the three schemes across the top are actually three different options. There are three different organization patterns. And we had a certain piece, and one of the priorities to this community is this was a tribal governmental center with a community component to it. And they wanted this to stand at the gateway of their community to show their sovereign nation. And so this was a building, and I'll use terms that maybe you're not aware or used to, but I would say this was a proud building. It wasn't boastful, but it was a building that stood tall, and it was proud at their front door. There are some buildings that are recessive. There are some buildings that are meant to be seen from a distance. There are some buildings that are supposed to be open and transparent, and a lot of governmental buildings will do that as a concept of how the government is open and transparent. Whether that's effective or not, I don't know. But in that, the site plan down below was one of 5 different studies we did on the site. And then the drawing in the lower right is really trying to get in and nail down those 3 options. They went with one, and we were able to do more of the space planning criteria with a color diagram, color-coded diagram of what that is.
Dee, if I could jump in here, I think the this idea of developing options and alternatives is really, from my experience working with tribal communities, is probably the most critical step of the design process, because there are many different ways that we could put this puzzle together, and we really need the tribal community's assistance and buy-in and how that works and what that means, the different how those different configurations become representations of the tribe, particularly in a cultural center or a museum. So I just really wanted to emphasize that.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Sean. Thank you. I've heard it referred to as the 2 bracelets. Is if you have 2 bracelets that you're choosing from, well, let me step back. If you have one, your answer is yes or no. But if you have 2 bracelets, your answer is, I like this about that bracelet, but I like that about that bracelet. And we typically in architecture, we try never to have more than 3 bracelets because it gets kind of confusing. But if you can think of a bracelet as a building, is the answer is usually not yes or no. It's part of that cycle of refinement, that circle that we saw before. It's like, what do you like about this? And let's round off the edges of this pebble and let's get it to be what it needs to be for you. And if we can compare and contrast, then we can dial it in. The next solution is better. The scheme that this community picked was completely off the wall. I thought this scheme was going to be thrown out, but they identified with it. They loved it. It became them. And on opening day, they said, this is us. They didn't say, Dee, you did a great building. They said, this is us. And that's the best compliment an architect can get, is this represents who we are. It's not overly stated. It's not more than we need, but it's a proud building. And it stands its ground. And that's what we like. And I think characterizing a building in those terms, I couldn't be more pleased. Some of the things we do in schematic design too is I like to practice with doing kind of white box studies, and we might have ideas on materials, but we can at least start showing the form, the shape. You can start seeing some of the organizational patterns. You can start seeing the north wall that has more of the strip glazing, the south wall that has more of the punched openings, some of the highlight into the community areas, and then some of the organizing features of these walls that go through. And this was a culture that really cherished their basket weavings, and we started being able to have those discussions and how we could actually create some of the pattern, texture, and that into the architecture. And also, one of the big organizing features was where the tribal council would reside. And we actually had a lot of security and safety communication about where they had to be. And they ended up being on a second level and controlled access with duality of directions they could go. So there's all kinds of influencers that help develop the shape of the building. Design development takes that same floor plan and puts a little more to it. It starts looking at the materiality. It starts looking at how the rooms lay out. We'll do some of that in schematic design, but it starts looking at organizing and coordinating the consultants. The building has to breathe. It has to inhale, it has to exhale. It has to be able to see both inward and outward. It has to be able to be climate controlled. To create these shapes and volumes, we need to work hand in hand with the consultant groups while we're working with the communities to understand that we're keeping the vision that we had early on at concept and schematic, that it becomes true to vision. So in that, a lot of consultant coordination at this point to develop how the utilities work, how the systems work, and how they coordinate. We do material studies. You know, what about the exterior wall? You want this permanence of a building, how it sets on the ground. You start looking at some of the tile patterns and some of the patterning of the building. You look at the coloration of how it picks up some of the hues of the landscape itself and how it sets within the canyon walls of this incredible community. So we also look at preliminary cost estimates to not get over our skis, as we might say here in Colorado, that we have a realistic checkpoint. And those are painful because balancing wish and desire to cost is always tough. It seems to be heartbreak, but it's part of the process. And I've found that it actually benefits to design within constraints. Sometimes makes the best design in the world. Building system study and coordination, same thing I talked about before, interior and exterior concepts, client and stakeholder meetings. These are ones that we're on this path together, and that's the way I like to work. This is a journey, but these are some of the milestones. Each one of these phases and phases within these are some of those things that we want to see. Now, I just zoomed in. I don't know what I did. Okay, I think we're back to square. During the design development, we start looking at the individual spaces and how the building is carved out inside and how the initial moves in schematic design are influenced and created. In this one, we had this building, we had that patterned wall that came through that was a motion that went through the entire building. And we had this large overhang on the south side that was part of the entry process that came in. So as you came in under the large overhang and went through the vestibule, their lobby was short, and then their council room was up on top with this great view to the north, down valley. So this is their council chambers, and what we can do in design development is really work on reinforcing the moves, the ideas, the parties that were established early in the concepts, and even going back to strategic plans is what do you need? What do you want? How are you organizing this, and how can we help with the planning to create the actual rooms that you occupy? This was a building that kind of had a formality to it of how you would welcome guests and how you might come down the staircase into an open lobby. It was a process, and it was a way to let this building do all the things that they wanted it to do, from a visitor's experience to a running the community, a tribe experience, to security, to community benefits and requirements. This building did it all, and it separated each people group easily and carefully into the places they were supposed to be without causing any safety issues. At least that's the way it's been so far. Then we go into construction documents, and construction documents are truly where we start finalizing how the building goes together. It's still consultant coordination, but the technical drawings are the nuts and bolts. It's how walls intersect. It's how materials intersect, how we make sure that we design them specifically architecturally with our consultants so that they stand the test of time. Waterproofing is one of the major issues that architects deal with. It's the #1 lawsuit in architecture. It's what we need to be careful with. Water is a powerful source. It creates huge canyons, but it also could create headaches in a building. And we're trained to work with that. We do cost estimates in this. We do specifications that show in a written narrative how each piece of the project goes together, what they're supposed to do, how they prepare surfaces, all that done. And then, and it's our final consultant coordination so that we don't have steel beams where we need mechanical ducts, or we don't have a electrical bus riser going through a fire stair condition. But we also work heavily on finish, fixture, and appliance selections at this point. So at this point, the building is feeling like it's pretty real. We've done enough to where we're trying to create the image, trying to bring our entire team together with you involved, and we're ready to send this out. I think there was a question from Matt. Did you raise your hand?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. I was just real quick when you started talking about these construction documents, and I guess further into would this be better for, say, like if we already had a project that's going on, to wait for a construction manager to start coordinating this?
We'll talk about that a little bit, but there's different things that happen. When we talk about integration of a construction manager, owner's representative, we had on this particular project an owner's representative for the tribe from concept all the way through the build out and the turnover. So I think the sooner the better, because they can actually help translate the issues, they can keep the project on schedule, and they speak on behalf of the community and the leaders of the community. As far as contractors, there's different ways to set it up. This was a project also that we had a contractor involved from design development on, and it was, as we would call, theirs to lose. It was kind of a contractor's assist. And what that brings in is it brings real value estimating, because they have to promise they can build what we're drawing. It does cause some conflicts. Sometimes contractors and architects honestly are oil and water, but I think it's the smart way to go. I love design build, especially after you've been with a group of individuals for a few cycles. You develop an understanding of strengths and weaknesses and what people do, and you develop trust. There's a lot to this that is a trust-based philosophy. We're not buying these items off the shelf. We're creating something new, and we have to all team together and work. As an architect, I can't push myself away from the table at any point in this process and expect to still get part of the meal. I've got to be an actual contributor all the way along. And the contractor does too. And the client and the owner's representative. It's really a great ride. And when you're done, it's an embrace that you'll never forget. To see the building come alive and to know that you've been a part of it and that it's going to stand there for years and years to come is just an amazing thrill. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Let me and Dee and Matt, this is Sean again. This will be probably a third to half of my presentation next week. Will be on the different construction procurement approaches. So Dee, I think you could, if you've got a lot of that material in this presentation, you can kind of hold back on that and give me.
I kind of went as far as I was going to go there, and
Okay.
I was going to start showing some of the modeling and some of that stuff. You know, we actually at this point are kind of sometimes doing flybys and whatnot. Bidding and negotiation, and I'll just touch on this quickly, is there's different ways to do this. Sealed bids, design build, contractor assist. There's just any way you can formulate it, but one of the best things to do is to get good information early, no matter where it comes from. Well, I take that back. If someone has a stake in the project, it's always better because they're going to be there. And I think we can all understand we don't want drive-by comments. I want someone that's going to be in the field with me. We're going to get drive-by comments, and that's great too. But a team is a group, in my opinion, that's in the field to play together. And I like that. We'll each have our specialties. We'll each have our talents. But in this, working together as early as possible, I can't be in a vacuum. Otherwise, it's all going to be about me. Construction administration is the simple process. Once you get a contractor on board, once you've agreed, sometimes there's a what we call value engineering. If they get on and their bids are all higher than what we have to spend, we have to come back in and rework some of the design features, rework some of the issues, hopefully not cut scope. Hopefully the budgets before that have been good. But then we get into the construction. And for an architect, it's construction administration. For the contractor, it's when they move, they mobilize on the site, they get their trailers on, and they start rocking and rolling with earth movement first, digging foundations, pouring that, a basement if you have, getting it back up to grade, throwing up steel or concrete, whatever it is, and starting to skin the box. But all along the way, this isn't a perfect science. And what we have to remember is there's going to be things in the field that come up. And we discover those sometimes with on-site visits. Architects usually don't live on the site. There are a few projects that are big enough that you do. But we do go to on-site visits. We do job walks, and we typically have weekly or every other week OAC meetings, which are the owner, architect, contractor meetings that just talk about schedule. They talk about things that are happening in the field, how many men and women are in the field working, rain delays, cold delays. In Minnesota, my goodness, when it's 20 below, it's batten down the hatches and get to a warm spot. The way they build up there is pretty amazing. They're very inventive. But on that, those are the real deal issues that affect a timeline on a building from start to finish. And it's a team. Once again, if I don't answer questions, the building's got to be built. They're going to have to come up with something. But if I can participate with them and we can all understand the party and what we want. I had a tradesman come up to me one time in California when I was working on the Grand Californian Hotel for Disney. And he said, "You did not draw this particular wall. It's not in your set of drawings. But the way this other wall sets up, you developed a party," and he didn't say party, "but you developed a system of materials that made sense to me. So let me tell you what I think this wall is when I turn the corner." And he was absolutely right. He understood where it started, where it stopped, what material transitions were there, because we were a team and we had shared that experience. He understood. Now, the legalities of it is, I need to document that and put it back into the set, but to have someone be aware and not be confused, confusion is a death blow to any process. So in this, On-site mock-ups is when we come in on this too, and sample review. So I'll review tile samples, but on the site, sometimes we'll do a full wall mock-up to where we might have the base material below, we might have the upper material, we'll show tile coming in, we might even have a roof piece coming on. And what it does is it gives the contractor a chance to practice and say, is this what you intended? Is this the pattern? Is this the style? Is this the transition? And we can go back to that and say, yes, that's right. And once I sign off on it, the rest of the building is supposed to be at that level, or that quality, or that grade, or I can reject it. We do a lot of concrete work. This particular project had a beautiful cast-in-place board form concrete wall. They did a sample in the parking lot, or in the gravel right there, and it was gorgeous. And I said, if you can do it like this, it will be approved. And it gives them a confidence of trying to cast concrete with an integral color finish with board form without any ability to patch it. It gave them confidence that the architects approved this one, I can do it. And they hit it and they knocked it out of the park. Other images of closeout warranties, and I'll touch on this, is, you know, the experience starts, the process starts before the building does with strategic. But the experience starts before you even get on the site. Is what do you see? What do you feel? And as an architect, I think I'm not just responsible for the building, I'm also responsible for the approach, the feeling, the guest experience, not just the first time, but every time. So in that, closeout warranties are basically how the project closes out. It's establishing warranties. Sometimes there's project manuals that go into it from the mechanical side that show the owner how to operate, how to maintain the equipment that they've been given in the project. There's also a lot of callbacks. There's a typical standing from the contractor that they have to retain certain part of the fees so that they can actually come back and fix things that don't work. Like I said, this is not an object that's been built a million times and sold in Amazon. This is something that's new. It's a new design every time, whether it's the mechanical systems, the plumbing systems, a lot of it is you know, doors and that type of thing. They're made by a manufacturer. They're good quality, operate. But when you put it all together, sometimes there's issues. So that's what the warranties are for. And the closeout is to make sure the client gets what they want. And I'm open to anything from Sean and Sam on that. One of the last things is this is what we shoot for. One, that the building lives beyond us as architects, and that building represents the community's cultures and places that they belong in, that they live in, that they become an active part of the community. This is a place where people enjoy coming and having their family experiences here. Or one of the projects I worked on, I didn't call it a building, I called it a trellis, because they were growing the culture on that building, and it was incredible. The things they've done go beyond anything we ever programmed, because the building is a living language and it's grown along with the people and how to use it. And so that's fantastic. This was opening day with ribbon cutting. It's a terrible picture. I was in the back of the crowd, but they were so proud of it. And it was their building, and they had worked so hard to develop it, and it was a great day. So at the end of the day, what's the design process? I hope I haven't led to confuse you more, but I hope that we can look at something as crazy as this and understand, with a little bit of Harold and the magic crayon and the purple crayon, that even this can have order and have purpose. And at the end of the day, we'll be at the next horizon, and this building will turn on, and we'll have a ribbon cutting ceremony. And that will be at least that stage of the design process. And then we all get to watch the building grow and become what it wants to be. So with that, I've completed the first session, and I've gone way overboard. I apologize. The next one is with Sean. It's selecting and working with architects and contractors. There are key things that I think will be interesting and great to know. And then Sam will be coming up on some of the future ones. And I'll cycle back on one of the very last ones we have. But with that, I go to the final slide. And I open it up to questions. Matt.
I got another question. I know, and this is more like I don't know if it's addressed or maybe it'll be addressed next. Are any of you the presenters going to be speaking about the term just went out of my mind? Oh, dang it. Penalties for like meet deadlines or anything like that.
Do you have that, Sean?
Yeah, this is Sean. I'll get into that a little bit because we'll talk about contracts and procurement and schedule and budget control next week.
Okay, thanks.
That,
Good question, Mark. Anybody else? Did I put everybody to sleep?
I think that was great, dude.
It was an excellent presentation, I thought.
Thank
You
you.
really covered a lot, but we needed to do.
Thank you. Susan, Melissa?
Sorry, this is Susan. Melissa, are you there? Well, we're working from home, and Melissa has 2 small children, so something might have happened. But if there are no more questions, I think we can probably wrap it up. Sam or Sean, do you have anything to add? Well, thank you, Dee.
Lots to add, and we have 5 more weeks
Yeah.
to do it.
Well,
Maybe the one thing that I would add to this is that Dee did a great job of describing this conceptual process. And I know that he and Sean would, and everyone who's done a project would agree that every project is different, every community is different, every tribe is different, and we would all tailor that process to whatever the specifics of that project would be. It wouldn't. There's no real formula, that checklist that applies to every project. So it's about taking that framework and making it work, and to really listen truly to the community and what their needs are, and that way you come up with something entirely unique and authentic to each culture and project that we work on.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, one of the great things that we do sometimes on projects, and I think it's very helpful, is we visit other communities, we visit other projects, and we kind of see what works and what blends in. But each one is a unique project.
I have a question, and maybe it's, but what do you like? What is your ideal client? Are they prepared, or do they come with ideas already? Are they flexible? What do you consider to be the ideal client?
One word for me: engaged.
Engaged.
And committed, and there for the right reason. And I find that more often than not, that's exactly what I'm privileged to see.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that, and I like a lot of the adjectives that you mentioned, Susan. I think that it requires a great project requires a lot of preparation ahead of time by the community, and it's a balance of being prepared and being flexible, because as that wonderful squiggly line that Harold draws, we don't really know where the process is going to take us at the beginning. And so sometimes we see clients come to us and they've already got the thing sketched out. And it becomes very hard to refine that and really make it their needs if that expectation and they've already visualized it in their head. So it does require a lot of preparation, but extraordinary flexibility as well.
Sam?
I would add to those comments, and I agree completely. Having the right people at the right time in the right room all together. What's really important is that all voices are heard that need to be heard, and so it's not a process between one architect and one representative of your organization, but it's about the collective knowledge of your entire group and potentially cultural leaders in the community and others. So defining that group of people and that process, the decision-making process is really important, the consensus building process, because this really is about your community's building rather than an individual. So it's really about people.
Thank you. Well, if there are no other questions, I think we can say thank you very much, Dee. You did a brilliant job. I learned a lot, so thank you. Sam and Sean, we'll see you next Wednesday. We'll sign off. Bye.
Thank you,
All
everyone.
right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. See you next week.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Man.